Welcome to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I'm Kaye Doran, a shamanic leadership coach and healer, guiding you through life with a foot in both worlds. When you understand the terrain of the inner landscapes, the mental, emotional, spiritual and energetic, you will become the leader within your physical life, both personally and professionally. After all, the power of change is in your hands. Let's get this journey started. Well, welcome back to another episode of Inner Voice of Knowing. And I have a guest that I'm very excited to actually go on this journey with you all and get to know. My producer of this podcast, Shane Bryan, interviewed this very, very interesting man and sent me a message and said, Kaye, I think he's going to be an amazing guest. And after listening to the interview with Martin Glover, better known as Youth, music producer, musician as well, but you have this other side to you. And so I'd really like to welcome you to the podcast, In a Voice of Knowing Youth. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kaye. It's a pleasure.
So not only do you have this amazing background, you're a musician yourself, and producing names like, I'm going to have to look here, so many names, Tom Jones, Kate Bush, Guns N' Roses, Pink Floyd, U2, In Excess, Crowded House, Paul McCartney. How did you actually get into the music industry, and where did your name go from being Michael Glover to Youth?
Okay. So I kind of just, I was a teenager. I joined my first band at 16.
Yeah.
My first tour was actually supporting the Australian band The Saints and the Adverts in 1977. I turned up at the audition. I'd never played bass before. There were 15 guys in the corridor. They're all 10 years older than me. But I got the gig. I didn't even have a bass. The guitarist had a spare one. Within 2 weeks, I'd learned the chops and we were on tour. The rest of my life has been like that. Amongst the catalogue of jilts and mistakes, I stumble across things. The big awakening for me, I think my third band, Killing Joke, I'm a co-founder of, was at 18. At that point, I kind of reinvented my identity and I took on my nickname, which was Youth, or actually Pig Youth, actually, at the time, because I was so messy. But it got shortened to Youth. And in doing that, that kind of removed me from my parental identity and former associations. And I started creating the life I thought I should be living. Very much like Bob Dylan when he changed his name from Robert Zimmerman to Bob Dylan.
Gives you an opportunity to sort of recreate yourself. Hey.
Well, yeah, I think also you have to kind of destroy the parental identity.
Yeah.
Ironically, most kids do that by wearing a Metallica t-shirt or something, something their parents don't like, They join another identity to remove the former identity until they get to a point of confidence where they just become their own identity.
Yeah.
Mine began then at 18. And then actually what really teleported me into the cosmos was a massive LSD meltdown when I was about 21. I'd been a bit cavalier about taking it on tour, and I felt I was so normal. There was no way I could ever lose it.
Yeah.
I was completely wrong.
We feel pretty invincible at that age, though, don't we? Really?
We do. But I just thought there was no possibility, just because I knew I was just really kind of normal. I didn't have too much of a traumatic background, but things progressed, and everything started to become. I wasn't spiritual as well. I was a street London punk, but I was in a band with two other members had been members of the Golden Dawn at 14, 15. So they were quite educated and academic about their spirituality. But I would just tease them about that and, take the piss out of them, really, until I had this meltdown. And then when that happened, the sky turned green, I head for the river, and everything became biblical and visionary. And I was arrested and put into a mental hospital for a couple of weeks. And and things just accelerated. They gave me other drugs in the hospital to calm me down, ECT, the electric shocks. All of that was like very surreal. I remember my father visiting me, who was a really big guy and a bit of a London face villain type character.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never seen him look so lost. And I said, "Isn't it strange, Dad, that we can sit here and talk and yet we're underwater, And,
Okay.
years later, when he was sick before he died, he was on some very strong drugs in hospital, and he was hallucinating similar visions. And I thought it was a funny role as a reversal then.
But did you know that you were hallucinating?
No, it was all very real for me.
Yeah.
And biblical, stigmata, all kinds of things like that.
Wow.
And visions. The hospital burnt down, was on fire. I had to get out. I mean, it didn't burn down. There was no fire.
Yeah.
But with my, psychotic frame of mind, there was. But I had some good guides as well. I had a guy called Dave the Wizard, and he and Brian Barrett, who was the sort of British Timothy Leary, had actually written a couple of books with Timothy Leary, would visit me with crystals and encouragement and say, "Look, you're right, you're not going mad, but this is a tough initiation." Dave the Wizard used to blow fire at our gigs. He was a complete urban shaman, always barefoot, 7-pointed star tattooed on his face,
Yeah.
18 wild cats. His partner then was Dweena, they lived in the top of our squat in Ladbroke Grove. She was later on married to Robin Gibb, and she's like the chief white witch of UK, and she does a beautiful trying to remember the name, Racemus scholarship for aspiring druids, witches, pagans, to help them complete their studies, about 50 grand a year. She's an amazing force of nature. I felt very honored to have known her then. But eventually that led to me, the night before I was up for a panel with a load of doctors, I had a meditation, and my spirit guides came to me. I was meditating with the crystal that Dave the Wizard had given me. Lee Harris had been in that day, was the first very old friend. These guys were much older than me, but they were being part of the sort of psychedelic alumni of West London.
Did they teach you meditation? Where did the meditation come in?
That came much later.
Yeah.
They were just... Steve Hillage, the great guitarist, gave me a book, Be Here Now, by Ram Dass, very famous book now. And that explained the enormity of what an acid trip can do to you and how to bring yourself down. That was quite good. But actually, I kind of got through it with this meditation. It was just a sort of random meditation, I suppose. I hadn't been taught it. But I felt these spirits come to me, and spirit guides, and say, when you go up before the panel, don't say you're wrong, you're right, and they're wrong. Just say, if you've had some LSD and you want to go home and see your mum, and they'll let you go. And that's what I did, and I did let go. I immediately went into a Welsh cottage and started rehearsing and writing Killing Joke's third album, and there were a lot of mushrooms there. That didn't help. It took me about 7 years to really integrate that experience, understand it. And at that point, I started studying shamanism, which led to me joining an order of Druids, the Obod order, very early on in the late 80s, about 7 years after that experience. Then the order was very small and had been regenerated by Philip Carcom. Now it's huge, with groves all over the world. And
because the Druids go back a very long way, and were sort of priest-like back then, weren't they?
Druids were the British Isles indigenous shamanic tradition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very connected to
So
the earth.
yeah,
Healers,
they're very
advisors.
similar to. In fact, there's a strong connection there, Indo-European connection with the Celts. So,
Yeah.
like the Brahmins in India, the Parsis in Persia, the Magi, they all fulfill very similar roles, similar functions. Um, Unlike those, Druidry did sort of die out had to go very underground, whereas Brahmins and Parsis traditions are still very much alive and continual,
Yeah.
and there's a continuity throughout those thousands of years of practice. Druids were then, by the probably 10th, 11th century, had to go very underground. When the Christians arrived, even more so. Although there was a tradition in Britain of kings and queens having their druid, like Arthur with Merlin, for example, a great example. That lasted till Elizabeth I, actually. So it was continued in that sense. And then it got absorbed into other esoteric cults of alchemy, Rosicrucianary, Masonry, things like
Yeah,
that.
I had a friend that was part of the order of the Rosicrucians. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great traditions. They're great mystery schools, really. And I think it's something everyone should do at some point, not necessarily the ones I've done, but one of them somewhere because otherwise you can become a bit of a pocketbook philosopher. And I felt actually it was going to India around 88, 89 that I was about to dive into Krishna Shiva culture and do some long retreats there. And then I did a meditation there, and it was like, you've got to go find your tradition where you live. So that was coming back to the UK. That led me to me joining a Druid order and going that way. But then I discovered there's absolute glove in hand correspondence with those traditions,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like reincarnation. The Druids actually had a slightly different angle in that you could, with the Celts, you could reincarnate in the same tribe and family for successive generations. You have three worlds in Druidry: the lower world, which is ancestors and memories and the past, the earthbound world of where we are now, and then the upper world where you have very strong deities and spirits that determine where your spirit's going to go. But there was an absolute belief in the return of that in a
Yeah.
reincarnation sense. And that's why the Celts, I think, I suspect and sense, had such fearless bravery in battle because they weren't worried about death. But going off tangent a bit, but yeah, Druidry really fitted me esoterically, a nature-based shamanic tradition native to these islands. These islands in the UK are littered with ancient monuments and sites. I have one just up the road here, literally 500 meters away. It's called a nod. And there are many nods in southern England, and they're little mounds with buried chambers, which were dedicated to the Celtic god Nadern, who's the god of sleep. And that's where we get the phrase nodding off and the land of Nod from, actually.
My husband would love that. He's always looking up where words and things have come from. Was this
Well,
something
it's
that you were seeking, or it just kept unfolding this way? Like,
I
had it
think a bit
always
of
been an
both.
interest?
Bit of both. After my meltdown, I needed to find some meaning in the universe, and that opened me up to a lot of different dimensions and
Yeah.
entities. So there was that curiosity, and also finding a tradition that suited me and fulfilled as my spiritual part of my psyche.
Mm.
And that's what fitted me well. Also, there's a genetic connection. All my father's family are from Anglesey, Mona, which was the sacred isle of the Druids, where they held off the Romans for many months, and has some incredible sites there. And I spent a lot of time at that. From that point on, I bought a VW camper van, and I'd explore those sites and go out in the middle of the night with a drum and meditate. I started to get into meditation, um, and I would sit in those sites over a equinox or a moon or something and tap into them. We would do that with my first band, Killing Joke, as well. We were all into that.
Did you say with the drum?
Yes, I go
Well,
with a
like with a
drum, and
shamanic drum?
no, it was a pair of bongos, But we actually jazz painted runes on those bongos to make them, a sacred object, but or instrument. But what we would do as we walk up, as we would approach the stones from my van, we would beat the drum, but we would focus on the space between the beats and not the beats.
Yeah.
And as we got closer to the beats, we get faster and faster. In one way, it would sort of twix your mind into a time beyond time, another dimension of sorts. A good thing to do. I got a lot of education from doing that.
Sorry, Youth. Yeah, I work with a lot of sound tools myself. So I work with my voice, singing energy to people, through people, and from people. But my first sound tool was a drum. I've now got, I don't know, 9 or 10 of them that I've made. So I really understand that in between the beat and where it, because it's known as the journeyer, where it can really take you.
Interestingly, in the 90s, I was in New York, spending a lot of time in New York. I worked with Gabrielle Roth, who came up with the 7 movements, is it? Phenomena. Sadly dead now, but I did some recordings with her, and her husband would always start recording with a Native American drum. And she'd do a similar thing and focus in between the beats. But yeah, rhythm and sound I discovered later on, and music, particularly music and poetry, very sacred for the Druids.
Okay.
It's a big part of the tradition, the bardic tradition. So that kind of fitted what I was doing as a music maker, as a writer, composer, and also as a producer. The role of producer is very much like the Druid, is guiding and teaching the artist and helping them make their best work, hopefully. And so that Druid tradition really bled into what I was doing as a job as well. I really informed that, and also encouraged me to go further into psychology and esoteric ideas and self-development ideas of how to get the maximum, the peak potential out of the artists I was working with. by that time I'd done many different kinds of meditational courses, starting with TM, Transcendental Meditation. That was the one that got me in, actually.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Druid visualization, journeying techniques as well. But then I was also reading, I had been reading for a long time, the author Colin Wilson, who's a very important writer in my world. He came to prominence in the 50s as a sort of British Sartre with his book The Outsider at 23, I think. An absolute piece of genius, that work. And that intrigued me. I mean, a lot of his books, including his fairly definitive book on the occult, were about how to find the peak experience, what he called the peak experience, and how to facilitate that in more ways than just random chance. So a lot of his books are about very significant, high-achieving authors, writers, magicians who all managed to do that, and their techniques. So I've kind of studied that and applied that to what I do and how I teach and work with artists and assistants. I train up engineers and producers as well. So all of that.
I loved in your interview with Shane, there are a couple of stories that you were talking about, and the thing of, that if the musicians were getting along almost too well, you would have to sort of create something because there just needed to be a little bit of, chaos in there as well, or the same thing if they weren't, coming together really well. I mean,
making a record with other people is all about alchemy and all about balance and finding an equilibrium of opposites whilst embracing those opposites.
Yeah.
So alchemy is all about, turning lead into gold. On the spiritual side of that, it's more about aligning what they call conjuncto, the opposites, and predominantly the male and female within, to create the triangle of the illuminated mind. So if something was going too smooth and too easy, I'd find a way to give it more challenge. Or likewise, if things are too challenging and starting to fall apart, I find ways of bonding the group and re-gluing us together. In the Druid tradition, there's a great metaphor of cup and sword, which goes back to Grail-like Arthurian ideas and symbolism. So you can distill every decision and choice you have down to cup and sword, essentially. I've discovered. So the cup is to yield and let go, and the sword is to push with the will and push through. So whether it's an idea of, should the bass line go that way or this way, if the bass player is really insistent on going that way, I might be more cup and yield to that. But if I still think it doesn't sound very good or get my feet moving or serve the song properly, I'll use the sword and suggest some other ways of doing it.
Has this enhanced the work that you do?
This is in 99% of the work.
Yeah.
So obviously,
do they understand what you're doing, or they go, this is just youth, this is just what youth does?
No, they just think, it's youth being weird and cosmic.
Yeah.
But that's fine. But I am articulate in being able to explain and describe what my vision or what I'm suggesting can be done. But I mean, many musicians I've discovered aren't, and they put all their communication skills through their work. Same with painters and artists.
Yeah.
It's a very similar correspondence with painting. I paint and I write poetry. Painting, you've got to get a color balance. You've got to get the drawing, the composition right. Those all include cup and sword choices throughout.
I love that.
And that's worth bearing in mind. While you're going through life, like what is. There's no absolute, there's no dogma in Druidry either. It's kind of what's appropriate at the time. So what might be a cup solution today, half an hour later, it might be a sword position,
Yeah.
So you have to learn to be flexible and embrace those contradictions, and be able to flow.
Yes, absolutely. It's being able to read that terrain, though, isn't it, really?
Yes, well, that comes with experience and insight and curiosity and a lot of other things.
Were you like this as a child? Like, did you have a religious background, or, you're clearly a very creative soul by nature?
It's just about living a creative life. I've actually got a book on it coming. But, it's about living a creative life. My parents weren't religious, so they were very non-religious. They had a good moral code, I thought, even though my dad was a bit of a villain. My mum was a model. But my father's mother, my grandmother, Nan Bess, from Wales and Birmingham, she was very psychic. She'd know what letters would come through the door before they came. We'd always go beachcombing on the beach in Rhyl, Wales, looking for gold rings. She'd always find one. And my family up in Wales were also very switched into the nature. It's a nature-based philosophy.
And I mean, I'm incredibly connected to nature, and the photo above me was one of the photos I took when I walked the Camino last year. And, for me, walking the Camino is a very different experience for a lot of other people, because
Where's that?
It's through Spain. So I started, had to cross the Pyrenees, 800 kilometres, and then all through Spain. But, my experience, because I'm shamanic, Yeah, is spirits coming out of trees and because I'm so connected to it all. And
I did a great one on my 60th birthday. I went up to Montserrat outside Barcelona, which is considered a Grail castle. Formerly, it's a cathedral now with the Black Madonna, but esoterics will say it was a Grail castle before that, and particularly the Fisher King Castle. I'm quite connected to the Grail stories as well, and I found it really amazing. And I'm often doing pilgrimages to Wales or sacred. I recently was in Dylan Thomas's country in Larne in Wales and visited his grave. And I didn't go on my knees and kiss the ground as Allen Ginsberg did 35, 40 years ago, but I spent some time there, and it was a beautiful thing. And I think it's a great thing to do.
This was for my 60th. I went with a friend of mine who was turning 50, but it was something that I had declared when I'd been reading a book when I was 25, and I was out camping and I looked up at the stars and put the book down and said, one day I am doing this pilgrimage on the Camino. And it took from 25 to 60, but I did it. It was amazing.
Well done.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So, do you find that a lot of the creative people have this spiritual connection?
No.
No.
I mean, a lot, if not most, are on the spectrum.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it may not be consciously spiritual, subconsciously something's coming through them. Because
for sure, yeah.
To be a writer and to apply your imagination in that way, that creative thing, it is a spiritual thing, whether you're aware of it or not,
Yeah.
And they have their ways of working with it. Some are more, sort of curious to explore it than others, but some are happy, more superstitious about not altering the way it is. That's fine. It's whatever works for you, I think. Also, I don't think it's been very hip to say you're spiritual. You'll end up looking like Sting or something, and being the butt of ridicule for the next 20 years on social media. That's changing, I think, because there's such a massive spiritual pagan renaissance going on in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is vast. And there's a lot of people who are just beginning that journey and really curious as to how to explore it.
Yeah, well, my thing is, concepts alone don't change anything. It's in the application where it becomes the integration of it. So, don't just read books and think that's made you spiritual if you're not actually doing anything with what you're reading and living. Do you think it's a courageous path?
Very difficult, very difficult, very lonely at times.
Yes.
But unavoidable if that is your journey. And actually to avoid it will incur even more pain and trauma.
Well, it did for me. I only suddenly felt at home within myself and within the world when it unfolded for me. Yeah. And I surrendered to it. Then I made sense,
If you're an artist and you're not being creative, it will turn against you and you'll end up with cancer or something like that.
Yeah, fascinating.
You have to walk that path, although it's a very, very difficult path. I don't think it matters where you find your path.
Mm-hmm.
All those paths lead to the same place anyway.
Yeah.
So, but it's important to find a path, and it's hard to do it on your own. So again, it's worth joining a cult or a order or something to give you a deeper mystery school education, because otherwise you will be a bit of a pocketbook philosopher on it.
Yes.
And it will also connect you to a lineage and continuity of people who've been on that same path for, sometimes thousands of years. And you'll have them on your back, giving you a hand up. So even though I myself, when I was a teenager, I was very cynical about anything spiritual and saw it all as corruption and control, power politics played out. And I've changed that view. I have a great respect for all those traditions now.
Mm-hmm.
And I find a lot of inspiration and peace in all of them, and I explore them. Even, especially the Christian ones, which are the ones I kind of rallied against initially. But I think you've got to go beyond the Judeo-Christian model, which really promises you something in the afterlife for a morality you should express now. Well, in a way, it's you gotta create that now. I think if you really walked a good life in that sense, that would appear to you in that way now. And they say, like, it's always an enchanted garden, but sometimes we go blind to it. So it's about opening your eyes and waking up to what that is what that truth is for you, and the trouble is, because there's no dogma to it, it's no right or wrong to it. It's you have to work it out. It's more of a sensibility and a philosophy than a religion. But I'm sure you will find it, because as soon as you make that single step, things will come to you magically and will help you find your way. They have for me, and I think that's why it's good, even though I've not done it, but I've got a lot of friends who've gone through NA and AA, and they've done the 12-step thing. And in that process, it's very successful. There's a very clear part of it where you have to acknowledge a greater power than yourself, which involves you being a little spiritual about that. But I think spirituality is, it's like body language. I sort of looked and studied about body language to be able to read the room better sometimes when I'm working with an artist. But what I discovered in the middle of that, it's not about other people's body languages. It's all about your own body language. And the same with spirituality, I think. It's not about you appearing to be a spiritual person because you've read a good book. But it's about you being a good person because you're a spiritual person.
Yes. And it's not about dressing the part, because even in my 20s, when I'd be asked to give a talk and they'd never met me, I'd knock on the door and they'd look me up and down and go, well, who are you? And I'd go, well, I'm Kaye. And there were two things. One, oh, well, you're younger than we expected. And two, you don't look the part. And I'm like, so would I seem more acceptable if I braided my hair and hung feathers from my ears? And do you know what I mean? It's, I
do. And I've found the same with Druidry. And in the early days of Druidry, there's a shortage of Druids in the order. Certain ceremonies and initiations required a Druid. So my chief would send me off to do these hand fastings and talks at spiritualist churches. And I also was, very involved in a grove in London for a number of years. But I found, even with the first ceremonies I did with Druids and witches, we'd be in this sort of wet, rainy field in Kent, and all these people had their Tesco shopping bags with them and looked like a complete bunch of muggles. And I'd be like, what the hell am I doing here? This isn't what I imagined. This doesn't fit my Arthurian Grail romantic ideas of what a Druid is. But of course, the power of the circle is such that people put those bags down, you hold hands and create a circle literally within minutes. people's faces change, the whole countenance of the energy changes, and you start seeing these archetypes coming through.
Yeah.
And it can be very powerful, and it could be a very powerful circle of magic. But I don't know, 15, 20 minutes before, it would be like standing at a bus stop in Harlesden, or in the co-op or something. You'd be like, what am I doing here? So I think that's part of the magic of that, and the transcendence of that, and the magic and transcendence of ceremony, especially when you're working with circles,
Yes.
is very powerful. Of course, the Native American Indians know that. I've done many ceremonies in America, and the actual theology and sort of philosophy is very similar to the Druid philosophy, and again, nature-based.
Yeah, it's very powerful when I do drumming ceremonies and circles, etc. It's like if the people haven't created that circle of connection, they're drumming as individuals. When they've actually, when that has been created of the coming together of individual energy, but collectively, the drumming instantly starts with a life of its own that's automatically connected, that rises and comes down, and it just, you know when it's finished. You know when the energy has just done its
Reminds
thing.
me when I was recording Crowded House, actually, in New Zealand. We met a lot of the locals there. They're quite far out. There's a guy called E.T. and there was this other guy, Cornelius, Dr. Cornelius, who was a GP.
Yeah.
But he'd been the ship's doctor on the first Rainbow Warrior. And he'd gone on this crystal quest around the world looking for these underwater crystal pyramids and found them. And written a book about it, which became a bit of a cult for me and my friends in Goa. I buy a dozen books and give them to the people out there. He would do a full moon drum party every full moon.
Yeah.
And they'd make these drums out of oil barrels, and then have about 30, 40 people. And the whole point would just be someone would have to keep the beat going throughout the night. He'd get a beep and have to go and do a delivery for a birth. Yeah. And we'd have to keep the beat going, and then he'd come back. And I thought it was great. Is that something you do?
Yeah, I run and facilitate full moon cacao drumming ceremonies, and yeah.
So what's where are you coming from spiritually with your shamanic practice? Is it South American, like the cacao, or what is it?
It's, well, that's a really interesting question, because my path has been a little bit different. And when I had a memory. So I had an experience in my 20s after a major car accident and learning to meditate. And I learned to meditate with my eyes open, and had an experience with a pinpoint of light that exploded in my chest. And I just wept, but I wept from, words don't seem to fit it, Youth, of joy. I knew my connection to everything and everyone and all things. And
so you're like a hedge witch. It's your own system.
Yeah, then I had another awakening experience. And like I said, all my life, from the moment I was little, I've heard this inner voice that's guided me. I've interacted with energy. I used to sing to animals and feel, when I'd look in the cow's eyes, I'd feel us become one, and I would feel its emotion, and these sounds and song would come from me, and then the energy would drop. And when you're that little, it just seems normal. It's not like I'm consciously thinking, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Or, I'd try to talk to my mother, and if she couldn't and I'd get shut down, that internal voice was always teaching me, always
so you
talking
never joined
to me.
An order or a group?
No, then I tried to join a group and seek some mentors, and I got horribly bullied. I learned that there's also a lot of ego in a lot. Well, back then I was like 25, so much ego. And then I would
also practices as well. Yeah.
And then I was getting really bullied, but I needed that pathway, Youth, because it made me continually come back to that voice. So it was through experience. So I have this saying that truth is beyond the shadow of the belief system, because I've experienced things I once wouldn't want to have believed in, right?
No.
but I know are true. I've been to different places, different spaces, had so many different experiences. So my training was through the experience and then this inner voice. And I know this inner voice to have three components to it. So it's the inner voice of knowing, power, and potential. So the inner voice of knowing aspect is source. The power is soul. And the potential is the future successful self that gives us those aspirations, those little whispers to write that book or whatever it might be, because that person already exists and is calling us, going, come, let me show you the ways. So that's why the inner voice of knowing to me has so much power. And when I guide others, then
very interesting. Like sometimes with music, when we create a track and it comes very fast, wasn't there the day before, and then it's this complete cathedral of sound.
Yeah.
It's like I feel that those things are already there. You're just kind of pulling them down and colouring them in a bit or something.
Yeah.
There's a certain channeling aspect to being creative. I think going back to what we were saying earlier, and also with your own intuition and guidance, I think.
Well, I became an
also,
unsuspecting trance channeler at one point in my life.
Right.
Yes. So I didn't ask for it. Do you know what I mean? It was.
No, but I mean, you could be a Reiki master, you could be a cow or shaman. Who I mean, can manifest in many ways, couldn't it? You know.
Yeah.
The
And when
same
I was
aspect is.
Yeah.
The channeling, you know.
Yeah.
The thing you have to worry about, I think, if you're on a shamanic path, it's worth reading a lot of Jung. I think I'm quite into Jungian psychology. Jung did a great graph of the self and the ego and the subconscious and the archetypes and your perceptions of the world and how you can balance that out. But also, you can have two circles of the mystical experience and psychosis, you know, and they often eclipse.
Yeah.
Because the mystical and the spiritual can flip you out. I mean, I used to go to Glastonbury a lot in my 20s and hang out with all these healers and witches. And I'd detox and decompress and reboot there and come back. And I was working incredible hours and ridiculous schedules. So it was a way of just getting a break from that. But I found that a lot of those healers and practitioners were falling out, as you said. And one would be, I'm channeling McTooth today, and your channeling yesterday doesn't count, and things like that. I thought it all got very Monty Python, as anything spiritual does. I mean, I often say we're all two steps away from being Alan Partridge. Have you seen my new book?
Yeah. Well,
and of course,
back in that day, everyone would go, my guide's telling me to tell you. And they were doing it that way because it's like, if you don't like it, hey, it wasn't me, you know.
Yeah. And that's another power move, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think it's sometimes, you know, and there's an inordinate amount of yoga gurus and spiritual gurus who, you know, are being called out for Me Too and, you know, cancelled as a lot of that. I think some of those spiritual practitioners do generate this huge amount of energy, psychic energy, and it's quite easy to have your ego flip out, like being a rock star. Yes. It's very easy when you've got thousands of people thinking you're Jesus to start believing it and then become this complete asshole, you know. And it's very hard to avoid it. In fact, you need to crash a few times to really understand it. I think the good traditions that deal with that really well are ironically the tantric traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism, where you can sort of channel it in a more responsible way. But it's also the Western European version of that would be alchemy. Again, trying to reconcile, harmonize those contradictory opposites within us to find an equilibrium and balance that is good, you know.
Yeah.
That is the way it should be, really. I
Well,
mean, sometimes it'll go like that a bit, I suppose. But again, that goes into kind of the morality and ethics of how you live your life, how a deeper footprint you'll leave, what kind of legacy you're going to leave, and the good that you do. And that again comes back to kind of Druid and Hindu ideas of karma, which I think also are very interesting ways of viewing the reality we're dealing with, especially today politically. Sometimes those things flare up so that they can actually be taken away with the tide tomorrow.
yeah,
And without it, it just remain the same. So I think it's a lot of self-journeying. It's an odyssey and very few people get to a point where they really understand who they are. And those are the ones you really want to be around, really. Look, if you're a writer of poetry, you want to cultivate friendships with other poets,
yes,
relationships with other poets and writers, read great poetry,
yeah,
absorb great writing. And I think it's the same with music and literature and all the arts, including the shamanic arts. I very rarely bring it up in a conversation when I'm working. In fact, I had a rule where someone would have to ask me 3 times about druids or druidry before I even consider answering them, because I didn't want to trivialize it.
yeah.
And for me, and I'd never talk like this about it openly on an interview or something for the same reasons, but it's different today. And now I feel it is a time to discuss that and open up about it. And for me personally, for me to share my experiences, and I try and do it in a humble way, and
Yeah.
an encouraging way that facilitates other people's own development and growth
And a
into
way that
those.
makes sense for people. Do you know?
Yes.
So there are times where I can take what some might seem really complex, but communicated in such a
Yeah.
way that makes it easier to understand.
Mm.
And
Like writing a great song, if you see, I learn a lot from performing and watching audiences, and people aren't stupid.
yeah,
They can sense things in a nanosecond. If the front person singer shows any kind of fear or hesitation, they will pack up and pounce on them,
mm-hmm,
and they know it instantly. And they
yeah,
know instantly when that's a sincere expression and when it isn't. And I think people in life do that. They're not able to articulate that or discuss it or understand it, but they will know in a deep sense way that this person is telling the truth and this is right, or not. And I think in that sense, you should. Yeah, we all have. I rely on that, but it's unpredictable and it's almost impossible to predict. Um, you know, um, it's a mystery. That these are the great mysteries of why that certain things really connect with people and other things don't. And on the surface of things, they're both the same, both really well made, beautiful things, but
yeah.
one will and one won't.
Do you feel
Um,
there's a difference from when you believe something, from when you've come to really know something? Because I've found that, when people are believe, and you've got to start with the belief, right? But then it's that process of the integration, the application, the integration, and then it lands as a knowing. But when you speak from belief, you've almost got to gather the other people and, get them to align to your belief and convince. But when you have a
yeah,
knowing, it's just like,
so the
you're saying it just
evangelical
comes
side,
from you, but you're
yeah,
not saying it because you have to believe me or I've got
yeah,
to convince you,
mm,
because you're just sharing it from a place of knowing. So it's a different energy and it lands differently.
yeah, yeah. I'd agree with that, and I'd I'd say you know the general public, they have a very good sense of that. So you shouldn't be afraid, but it's a skill and an art to it, which is why some performers just kick it off out the park and others struggle. You know, they may be singing the same songs, but they may have beautiful voices, but one isn't, you know, able to communicate it in that way or as simply or effectively as the other. But I think we all have a voice, we all have a song, we all have a story, and you know, if that's something you really want to express, and if you keep doing it, you can learn it. You can learn to draw. You can learn a lot of things. You can learn to play an instrument. You can learn those things, and then those things will work through you, and you'll facilitate them, and it will be as beautiful as some of the other greatest things. You don't have to be. You know, you don't have to be a great Jimmy Page or Vanessa Mae on a violin. You can be a Woody Guthrie or a Bob Dylan with just 3 chords and a couple of verses. Every story has its place. Every expression has a purpose in its way. And it's still worth doing, even if you don't think what you're doing is very good. I think the malaise of modern world is because we've forgotten how to be creative, and you know, when we're all before the age of 12, everybody's creative and doing things, and then it dies off, and only about 2% remain creative.
Do you feel, Youth, that the musicians, because that's the world that you're sort of in, well, that you are in, that sustain their success are because they're still doing it to be of service at some level? Like it's no longer, it's not purely the fame or, you know, the finances. It is still being of service in sense that this music needs to come through and go out. Or that's not relevant?
No, I mean, I think there are many that maybe see it like that and still are able to be that. But, you know, it's not many artists can sustain that relevance and degree of artistry. And I have a few theories as to why that is, but, you know, even bands like the Stones and they haven't really made a great record for about 25, 30 years, but they're still touring and selling out shows and do great shows. They're probably the artists are the last people to know why they do it.
Yeah.
Often if you ask them, they don't know. They just feel they have to.
Yeah.
Now, that could be from ego. I mean, certainly ego. You need a bit of ego to be a performer, to get you up on a stage, you know. So
we all need a bit of ego, just not you know, out of control, but
yeah. But the whole idea is tap into something, you know, cosmic and universal that speaks for everyone in an individual way, and it's but many get better. I mean, it used to be just jazz musicians and folk musicians would get better as they got older. Artists usually would get better, painters and writers as well, but rock stars generally don't. And a few do. I mean, look at McCartney now. He still actually makes good records. So does Dylan. Still make good records. And they don't need to do it for the ego or the money. They do it because, like I said, if you have that gift and you can do it and you don't do it, we're all guilty of the love we hide away and we do not give, you know.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you incur kind of bad karma, and that has consequences. Yeah.
Very true.
So there's an innate sense, I think, that drives them, even if they're not able to articulate it.
Now, I don't want to draw on too much of your time, Youth, because you've been so generous already. But I've got to talk about the Gyuto monks with the chanting, because you know, you told Shane a beautiful story about, sort of not feeling worthy. I can't remember quite the words. And they said, oh, no, we're honoured, that you're
they were very
doing
humble.
this.
Yeah. Well, the Tibetan tantric tradition, Buddhist tradition, is very ancient and very beautiful. And I was very honoured to be asked to produce an album with them for Decca and spend 2 or 3 weeks in their monastery recording a Manakana ceremony. And yeah, I mean, it was a really one of the best albums I've ever done, and really a great experience to do.
Does that change you somehow? I mean, those chants are just incredible, and you're there for a few weeks.
Seep in. Yeah, it does seep in.
Yeah.
But there was a point where I was having a smoke on the back terrace, and the abbot came out with a high-ranking Rinpoche and introduced me, asked me how it was going, and I was like, well, it's going great. I'm not sure if I'm pure enough to be here to do
that
this.
Was it, yeah.
No. You get it wrong. You're not, we're the honored ones to have you, which immediately made me feel very comfortable and relaxed and at home. And I just thought, well, to be that powerful. I mean, don't forget that Tibetan lamas were the government as well as the state religion in Tibet. One of the things that eyed China the most, I think.
Yeah.
And that gave them a lot of power, and there are a lot of power struggles then and now between different lamas from different valleys.
They're
all shining light. Some of the dark black hat ones that you see in Tintin comics. But the humbleness that the Rinpoches and the abbots displayed to me, it's really inspiring, because in their world, they're very, very powerful people.
Yes.
And that was really impressive and informative. And I do a lot of chanting as well. I use a lot of Tibetan chants in my process and discipline meditation anyway. So I'm a big adherent to chanting. I think there's something inherently powerful about it, and it does something amazing to the mind. It reboots the mind and declutters it, as meditation does anyway. To be very close to the source was the Gyuto Monks of the Dalai Lama's own order, and with him in the monastery was a great honor. Yeah, of course. And it affected me. I took my 11-year-old son as well, and he found it, phenomenal as well. And it was a beautiful thing. A few years later, I did a tour of India with a Sufi flamenco project I put together. And we were doing a tour of Sufi festivals around India and Bangladesh with about 100 other musicians, up to 20,000 to 40,000 audience spectators.
Wow.
And again, I found that incredibly spiritually uplifting and nourishing, because Qualia Sufi music, ecstatic trance is essentially a divine thing. Nevertheless, I don't see why you can't apply it into a pop record. I mean, I love Ray Charles. Ray Charles was
I love Ray Charles, yeah,
by the Baptist evangelical churches for taking what they considered as church music into clubs, and people walk out. It's in the movie about him. People walk out of the club denouncing him as blasphemous for bringing in gospel elements to raunchy blues songs. But that's something I think should be encouraged. I think we could do with a lot more of gospel in our pop charts, or anything that makes us feel better about ourselves.
Music has the power to heal, and there's a woman here who's working with her voice and with orchestras as well as the drums and the singing bowls and all the rest at a particular hertz, 432, everything that they're creating.
Yeah.
And they're actually doing
Sometimes,
studies to study on the impact it is actually having. Like, does it heal?
yeah.
You know, but we know music heals. It uplifts us, or it brings us down, or it, you know.
Yeah. It's a no-brainer. It's a very fast mood changer for a
Yeah.
start. If you want to change the vibe in a room, put some music, instantly changes it. But also it deals with frequency and vibration, which the entire universe is made from. So you're
Yeah.
going under the rug of reality, in terms of when you're using it intentionally. I like to, I often, if I'm in a bath or a hot spring or the sea, I'll immerse my head backwards and do some drones and chants, so I can feel those tones resonating in all the bones in my body.
Yeah.
But I think just going to a rock gig and seeing AC/DC blast out their hits, that'll do something to your bones as well. Well, it used to, because they're a lot quieter now. But sub bass, Jamaican music. I grew up listening to dub and sound systems where the bass just completely envelopes you.
Yeah, blues was my thing.
Incredibly,
blues got my soul going and dancing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all those things are incredibly healing and facilitate you dancing and meeting people. You know, it's the glue that holds us together, really. And music really, I think it's so important that if we didn't have music, I don't know if we'd really want to be alive. You know, because it facilitates so much of our joy and celebration, and our sadness and sorrow. I mean, there's nothing like a good requiem. Sometimes we're fairly simple humanoid creatures. We need to be guided or, sort of nudged into feeling something for certain things, which is why a beautiful organ recital in St. Paul's. I go often to St. Paul's in London with my son to listen to the organ recitals in that acoustic, one of the best acoustic rooms I've ever heard. And we come out floating and elevating. There's nothing religious. We don't go for the religious service. Sometimes there is a religious service. They do a midnight mass on Christmas, which is stunning and sublime. But the resonance and the reconnection to the world is palpable and very powerful, and also can help facilitate your own confusion and psychosis sometimes into a mystical realm, because it goes beyond the intellect and academia of rationality, and you're into the more Dionysian world of symbols and Jungian symbols and archetypes and things like that, which are also really powerful in informing your present being and state of mind, I think. I don't think, you can ever avoid feeling down. It's like, can't have sunshine without rain. You can't. In Wales, they say you have to learn to take the rough with the smooth.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you have these peak experiences, as Colin Wilson would describe them, you will have a peak low afterwards as well. And we are very fragile little sailing boats on a cosmic sea, and we feel things. We feel pain. We feel the inhumanity that goes on with the destruction of in a war situation like Gaza or Ukraine, or even Trump taking away the medicines for millions of AIDS sufferers. You can really feel that, and you should feel that. It's important to feel that, because that is what imbues your character and your integrity. And these things are really important to survive the storms of the world. Without those things, you will not even feel worthy of it, and you won't be able to contribute anything of it. So it's important to gauge your moral compass into a direction that's going to make you feel good about yourself. And
Yeah,
that
and I
isn't
think,
too difficult for you to live up to either.
and
You know,
sometimes music actually taps you back in, because these days everything's concrete, everything's, mentally based, and also the taking in of so much information, especially with what's
yeah,
happening in the world now. Sometimes you just need that music that will actually tap you back into feeling, because a lot of people then stop, they
that's a great way of
disconnect
putting
from
it.
from
Yeah,
feeling. And I
taps you
think
back
that's
into
why I
feeling. Yeah,
love so many, different genres, depending on how I'm feeling and how I want to
yeah,
feel, or
yeah.
how I want to be made to feel. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And taste as a personal form of censorship, as the great late Mark Stewart said. But without taste, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
So, but that implies you have to cultivate your taste, and that can be done. And like when I was in my 20s, I really didn't like jazz, and I avoided any jazz references in my music productions, and I felt very indulgent and academic. And then I had a friend who suggested I buy a vintage collection of jazz records. Quite a lot of money at the time, £600 for 600 records. And I said, "Yeah, but the thing is, James, I don't really like jazz. I don't want to go into jazz. I avoid it." He goes, "That's why you should get it." And I went, "Yeah, you're right." And so I bought it. And then over the last 30 years, I've been developing and encouraging and nourishing this beautiful love of jazz that I now have. And most of the music I listen to for recreational purposes is
Yeah.
jazz. And
Do you think we
it's
can
taken me a
grow
long time.
into styles of music, like foods and drinks? We suddenly,
I
the,
think
the,
so.
the palate matures.
It's good to educate yourself, yeah, and take on things that may seem a little challenging.
Yes.
Go and see Thurston Moore, do his noise, or Glenn Branca do his guitar orchestra. It's just noise. Or even Mogwai is an ambient post rock band, but it's the noise, and it's very challenging to get your head around, but you come out feeling renewed when you do get it. And the same for Dylan or anything that
Yeah.
requires a bit more than a banal appreciation, will reward you and inform you. And yes, and like a good palate on your tongue, if you spend 2 years living in Italy, you will understand why they have 15 courses at lunch with different wines in between, because it makes total sense once you
Yeah.
get it, you know. And it's better than just having beans on toast. Not every day. Sometimes it's better to have beans on toast
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
day and
Yeah.
occasionally have a
Yeah.
15-course Italian gastro feast. But of course, I mean, the same with literature. It's nice to read a bit of fictional escapism here and there, but
Absolutely.
eventually you want to get on read the James Joyce and Steinbeck and the greats, because they will inform your psyche as well as your intellect. And they will educate you into being able to discern the difference between something that is great and something that is fake. And that comes down again to taste.
Yeah.
Your taste will be very good. The only reason I'm a great producer is because I make really great records, I think, that have a big artistic merit. That gives me, and that's because I've got good taste that I've developed over the years. And that's why other artists who have also got good taste, they like those records enough to think, well, let's get the guy who made those in to make ours.
Yeah. And the
And
skills that
that's,
you bring to it, with all, like with all your Druid and your spiritual background and all that.
well,
The
I
thing
don't
that I
know,
love
but
about what you've said, Youth, though, that really stood out for me is that, try everything. And even if you think you don't like something, actually try it,
absolutely, you've got to go beyond your
and try
comfort
it with an
zone.
open mind.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, who knows where it will get you? It will certainly get you out of your living room. Um, but like recently, I was in Paris, and my host wanted to give me some l'escargot. I said, "Oh, I've eaten snails before. Um, but I'd rather have prawns, I think, tonight."
Yeah.
But then the following night we went out and someone else was having an escargot, and I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind trying one. I tried a couple. And of course, an escargot isn't really about the snail, it's about the sauce. You know, in Paris, it's very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And the sauce is almost unbeatable. So, you know, that was a great pleasure. Pleasure's important in life. It's important to find your bliss, because I mean, it's important at times as well, at different times, to remove your bliss and joy and maybe go into a cold stone cell and meditate for 40 nights, to, you know, just to recalibrate your intuition a bit more. I mean, that was the name of an album I did once, was called Calibrate Your Intuition. I mean, a lot of all what we're talking about is about recalibrating your intuition towards things that are going to nurture you and develop you spiritually, artistically, emotionally, and you know, that's what it's all about. Really, it's about big belly laughs with old friends and new friends, and everybody being able to help everybody else out in their own way to make everybody's life and day go a little bit easier.
True collaboration, which is connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could talk to you forever and a day, Youth. I really appreciate your time. And of course, I always ask the question, because the podcast is Inner Voice of Knowing. Do you feel that you are guided through different circumstances at times in your life from that inner knowing?
I think that's easier to see in hindsight when you look back and you go, oh, that's why that absolute disaster that almost broke me happened, because it led to me doing this, which led to me actually doing some of the best stuff I've ever done.
Yeah.
It's very hard to see that while you're going through that at the time. But I think it is important to stay positive, keep your faith, even when you've abandoned most of it, hang on to a thread of it.
Yeah.
And just try and be helpful. I mean, despite you may needing the help, if you can be helpful to someone else, the help will come back. And it's important to stay positive, because those storms come and go, and they do pass, and you become stronger and better for it. But if you let go of your positivity, you could get carried away and taken off into the storm, and thrown down the gutter. You know, I say, I've often said a good metaphor for what artists do is that it's a devotional vocation to be an artist and a writer, and a painter. And if you give the right amount of devotion, and I see the sort of creative muse and goddess as feminine, or predominantly feminine.
Yeah.
So if you give her the right amount of devotion, the required amount of devotion, then she will reward you. But if you start to think that is you and your ego talking, and it's all you, she will rub your nose in the piss-strewn gutter, throw you down under the bridge.
So true.
I've seen it happen, you know, time and time again with artists and rock stars. I think the single blows up, they become blood, they get rid of all their old mates, and all goes horribly wrong, you know, and they end up in very lonely, bankrupt situations, forgotten, you know, and there is a devotional element to it. And I think that stops you getting carried away with what you're doing, you know, and your ego too much when you remember that. And it's not something that you ever arrive at and then you can stop thinking about it. It's every day you have to remind yourself that.
It's a choice. Every day choice.
Yeah.
Every moment it's a choice.
You know, you have to do the best you can with what you can and push that as far as you can. And if you do that, it should be enough.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Youth, for, again, you know, you didn't even know who I was on my podcast. You just heard from Shane, and I so appreciate you're over in the UK, and I so appreciate you, taking time out.
My pleasure.
And
lovely talking to you.
Sharing that space with me.
Yeah, great.
Join me on my next episode. And if you love this podcast, please subscribe by clicking on the plus button if you're on Apple, or like and follow on Spotify. Rate and review. And please share Inner Voice of Knowing with your friends.